The Ozark Mountains, a place of deep valleys and ancient hills, a rugged land beautiful and wild. But beneath that beauty, secrets can hide. They can linger in the thick woods and dark hollows for a very long time. For generations, people here have kept to themselves. Their stories are often passed down not in books, but in hushed tones around a fire. They speak of strange lights in the forest. They whisper about families who live far from any road, hidden away from the world. It is a place where the line between fact and folklore can become blurry, where a simple story can grow into a chilling legend. This region, with its dense forests and twisting caves, has always been a haven for those seeking solitude, or perhaps for those seeking to hide something else entirely. In the late 1800s, it was a frontier in its own right. Law and order were often miles away, separated by unforgiving terrain. Neighbors knew each other, but they also knew to mind their own business. This deep-rooted culture of privacy and suspicion created the perfect environment for a mystery to take root. And in the small community near Forsyth, Missouri, a dark secret was about to grow, one that would haunt the area for more than a century. The people who settled these hills were tough. They were resilient. They had to be. They carved out their lives from the rocky soil and learned to live with the isolation. But that same isolation could be a double-edged sword. It offered peace, but it could also breed suspicion and fear. When something went wrong, when someone disappeared, the dense woods seemed to swallow them whole, leaving behind only questions. The wilderness did not give up its secrets easily, and the people living within it often held their own secrets just as tightly, locking them away behind closed doors and stern faces. And so our story begins here, in this land of contrasts, a place of stunning natural beauty and deep, unsettling shadows. It was a time when the world was changing fast, but in the heart of the Ozarks, time seemed to stand still. People trusted what they could see with their own eyes and what they heard from their closest neighbors. But sometimes what they saw and heard was enough to send a shiver down their spine. It was in this setting that the Weller family made their home. And in doing so, they etched their names into the darkest chapter of Ozark history. The Weller family was not from the Ozarks. They arrived sometime after the Civil War, a quiet family looking for a place to be left alone. Thomas Weller was just a boy then. His parents, Elias and Martha, bought a piece of land deep in a place called Forsyth Hollow. It was far from the main town, up a path that was more of a suggestion than a real road. They built a small, sturdy cabin with their own hands. It was a simple home, nestled among the tall oak and hickory trees. The location was beautiful, but it was also profoundly isolated, far from the nearest neighbor. Elias and Martha Weller were hard workers. They cleared a small patch of land for a garden and kept a few animals. They were self-sufficient, needing very little from the outside world. They rarely came into Forsyth for supplies. When they did, they were polite but distant. They did not linger for town gossip or social gatherings. They bought what they needed, salt, flour, maybe some tools, and then they would retreat back to their secluded hollow. The townspeople learned quickly that the Wellers preferred their own company, and they respected that choice, as was the custom in the mountains. Thomas grew up in this bubble of isolation. He had no siblings, and no friends his own age. His world was the cabin, the garden, and the vast, silent woods that surrounded his home. His parents taught him how to hunt, how to trap, and how to live off the land. They were his only teachers, his only companions. This upbringing shaped him in profound ways. He learned the language of the forest better than the language of people. He understood the changing of the seasons and the habits of wild animals far more than he understood the simple pleasantries of human connection. As the years passed, Elias and Martha grew old and eventually passed away. They were buried in a small, unmarked plot near the cabin. Thomas was left entirely alone. By then, he was a grown man, but he was a man who had known little else besides the solitude of Forsyth Hollow. He continued to live just as his parents had, maintaining the cabin and the land. He was a ghost on the edge of the community, a figure people knew of but did not truly know. And as he lived out his solitary existence, the whispers about the strange man on the hill began to grow louder. Thomas Weller was a puzzle to the people of Forsyth. On the rare occasions he came to town, his presence was unsettling. He was a tall, gaunt man with eyes that seemed to look right through you. He rarely spoke. When he did, his voice was a low, gravelly whisper, as if he was not used to using it. He would walk into the general store, his gaze fixed on the floor, and point to the items he wanted. He would pay with old, worn coins, never making eye contact with the storekeeper. Then, just as quietly as he had arrived, he would slip away, back toward the woods and his hidden home. His behavior was more than just shy, it was odd. Some townsfolk noticed he would sometimes stand perfectly still in the middle of the town square, just watching. He wasn't watching anyone in particular, it seemed. He was just observing, like a predator studying its environment. He would stand there for minutes at a time, motionless, before turning and continuing on his way. Children would stop their games and stare. Women would pull their shawls a little tighter. The men would just shake their heads and mutter to each other about the strange Weller boy who had become a strange Weller man. There were other things, too. He was known to collect strange objects. People who had dared to venture near his property line reported seeing odd bits of metal and glass hanging from the trees. They looked like crude wind chimes, but they made no pleasant sound. Instead, they would clink and scrape against each other in the wind, creating a dissonant, eerie noise that carried through the hollow. It was as if he was trying to create a barrier of sound, a warning to anyone who might wander too close to his isolated world. It was a strange and unnerving decoration for a home. These habits only served to deepen the mystery surrounding him. Why did he hang junk in the trees? Why did he stare so intently at nothing? Was he simply a product of his isolated upbringing? A man who didn't know how to act around others? Or was there something darker lurking beneath his quiet exterior? The people of Forsyth didn't have answers. All they had were their observations and their growing unease. Thomas Weller was a part of their community, yet he was completely separate from it, a silent, watchful presence on the hill overlooking their town. As Thomas Weller grew older, his isolation deepened. His trips to town became even less frequent, happening only a few times a year. The path to his cabin grew more and more overgrown, almost disappearing back into the forest. It was clear he wanted no visitors. This intense seclusion only fueled the rumors that swirled around him. People in Forsyth started to talk. They wondered what he did all alone up in that hollow. The stories started small. Some said he talked to himself. Others claimed he howled at the moon like a wolf. The whispers grew more fantastic with each telling. The rumors soon took on a darker tone. Hunters and trappers who passed near Forsyth Hollow began to report strange things. They spoke of unsettling noises coming from the woods around the Weller property. It wasn't the sound of any known animal. It was described as a mix of a high-pitched wail and a low, guttural growl. Some said it sounded like an animal in terrible pain. Others were convinced it was a human voice, screaming in the dead of night. These sounds would echo through the valley, sending a chill down the spine of even the most seasoned woodsman who heard them. People began to avoid the area altogether. The path to the Weller place was considered haunted ground. Children were warned never to go near Forsyth Hollow, told that Mad Thomas would get them if they did. The stories became a way for parents to keep their kids out of the dangerous woods. But for the adults, the fear was real. They started to blame Thomas for any strange occurrence. If a farm animal went missing, people would glance nervously toward the hills. If a strange track was found in the mud, they would whisper the name Weller. Thomas, for his part, seemed completely unaware of the legend growing around him. Or, if he was aware, he didn't care. He remained in his cabin, a phantom in his own home. The noises from the woods continued, sometimes for several nights in a row, and then they would fall silent for months. The unpredictability made it all the more terrifying. The community of Forsyth was caught in a difficult position. They were afraid, but they had no proof of any wrongdoing. Thomas Weller was just a strange, reclusive man. And in the Ozarks, that wasn't a crime. They could only watch, and wait and wonder. In the spring of 1897, a man named Martin Graves came to Forsyth. He was a traveling salesman, a common sight in those days. He sold pots, pans, and household goods from the back of his wagon. Folks remember he was a cheerful, talkative man, just the complete opposite of someone like Thomas Weller. Graves made his way through the town, selling his wares and sharing stories from his travels. He mentioned to several people that he planned to visit every home in the area, no matter how remote. He was determined to make a sale, even if it meant traveling up the most difficult paths. One afternoon, Martin Graves told the local blacksmith that he was going to try his luck up at the old Weller place. The blacksmith warned him against it. He told Graves that the man up there was strange and didn't take kindly to visitors. He advised the salesman to leave well enough alone, but Graves just laughed it off. He was a confident man, sure of his ability to charm anyone. He said he had dealt with all kinds of people and wasn't afraid of a simple recluse. With a friendly wave, he steered his horse and wagon toward the overgrown path leading to Forsyth Hollow. That was the last time anyone in Forsyth saw Martin Graves. Hours turned into a day, and then two. His horse and wagon did not return. At first, people thought perhaps he had simply moved on to the next town. But as the days turned into a week, a sense of dread began to settle over the community. The blacksmith, feeling a sense of responsibility, finally went to the town sheriff. He told him about his conversation with Graves and his fear that something had happened to the salesman up at the Weller property. The sheriff listened grimly. A small search party was formed. It consisted of the sheriff and a few brave townsmen. They made their way up the difficult path to Thomas Weller's cabin. When they arrived, they found Thomas outside, chopping wood. He seemed completely unfazed by their presence. The sheriff asked him if he had seen a traveling salesman. Thomas just stared at him with those empty eyes and shook his head slowly. He offered no other words. The men searched the immediate area around the cabin, but they found nothing. No sign of Martin Graves. No sign of his horse or wagon. It was as if the man had vanished into thin air. With no evidence and a deeply uncooperative witness, the search was called off. For 2 years, the disappearance of Martin Graves remained an unsolved mystery. The people of Forsyth never forgot, but with no new leads, the case went cold. The whispers about Thomas Weller continued, now tinged with a darker suspicion, but there was still no proof. Life in the small Ozark town went on. Then, in the fall of 1899, a storm of incredible power tore through the region. The wind howled like a demon and rain fell in sheets for days. Rivers flooded their banks and the powerful currents washed away years of soil and debris from the hillsides. The storm was devastating, but it also revealed a terrible secret. A few days after the rain stopped, a farmer checking on his land downstream from Forsyth Hollow made a grisly discovery. The floodwaters had receded, leaving behind a jumble of uprooted trees and mud. And in that mud, he saw something white. It was a bone. Then he saw another and another. It was a human skeleton, partially buried in the silt. The farmer ran to town to get the sheriff. The spot where the bones were found was directly below the steep hillside where the Weller cabin stood. The sheriff brought Dr. Hargrove, the town's physician, to examine the remains. Dr. Hargrove was a careful and methodical man. He confirmed that the bones were human. As he carefully cleaned and examined the skeleton, he found something lodged in the rib cage. It was a small lead ball from a muzzle-loading rifle. This person had not died of natural causes. They had been shot. The doctor also noted that many of the bones had strange marks on them, as if they had been scraped or cut with a knife or a saw. It was a deeply disturbing finding that suggested a brutal and methodical dismemberment. The discovery sent a shockwave through the community. The sheriff immediately thought of the missing salesman, Martin Graves, but he also thought of other people who had disappeared in the area over the years. There had been a trapper who vanished a decade earlier, and a young woman who had left her home and was never seen again. These were old, cold cases, but now they felt chillingly new. The location of the bones, directly below the Weller property, was too much of a coincidence. The sheriff knew he had to act. He gathered his deputies, and this time, they went to the Weller cabin with the search warrant. When Sheriff Miller and his deputies arrived at the Weller cabin, Thomas was inside. He showed no emotion as the sheriff presented the warrant. He simply stood aside and let the men enter his home. The inside of the cabin was dark and filled with a strange, unpleasant smell. It was cluttered with the junk Thomas had collected over the years. Piles of old tools, broken pottery, and twisted pieces of metal were stacked in the corners. It was the home of a hoarder, a man who never threw anything away. But the deputies soon found that he collected more than just junk. The search began in the main room. As one deputy moved a pile of old blankets, he found something underneath. It was a small, leather-bound book. It was a sales ledger, and on the first page, in neat handwriting, was the name Martin Graves. A cold chill went through the room. They had found their first piece of concrete evidence, but the discoveries were just beginning. In a dusty wooden chest, they found a collection of personal items that clearly did not belong to Thomas. There was a woman's silver locket, a man's pocket watch, and a small carved wooden bird, a toy. The most horrifying discovery was made in the small cellar beneath the cabin floor. The smell down there was overpowering. Hanging from the ceiling beams were several large, sharp hooks like those used in a butcher's shop. On a workbench in the corner sat a collection of knives and saws. They were stained with something dark. The dirt floor looked uneven, as if it had been dug up and refilled many times. The sheriff knew with a sickening certainty what had happened in this room. This was not just a home, it was a slaughterhouse. This was where the screams in the night had come from. Upstairs, the search continued. In a small box tucked away on a high shelf, they found the most damning evidence of all. It was a collection of human teeth, dozens of them. They were all different sizes and shapes, clearly from many different people. Some had gold fillings. The sheriff remembered that Martin Graves had been proud of the gold filling in his front tooth. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together in the most gruesome way imaginable. Thomas Weller was not just a recluse. He was a collector of secrets, a collector of lives. He was a serial killer who had been hiding in plain sight for decades. The arrest of Thomas Weller and the horrifying discoveries at his cabin shattered the peace of foresight. The town was thrown into a state of shock and fear. The man they had dismissed as a harmless eccentric, the subject of children's scary stories, was a monster. The news spread like wildfire through the Ozark hills. People from neighboring counties traveled to Forsyth, wanting to see the House of Horrors for themselves. The Weller cabin became a grim landmark, a place people pointed to with a mixture of terror and fascination. The legend of Mad Thomas was no longer a story, it was a terrifying reality. Thomas Weller never stood trial. He remained completely silent after his arrest, refusing to speak to the sheriff or anyone else. He would simply stare with his cold, empty eyes. A few weeks after being locked in the town jail, he took his own life, taking his secrets with him. The exact number of his victims was never known. Authorities were able to identify Martin Graves from the sales ledger and his gold tooth. The silver locket was traced back to the young woman who had vanished years before. But many of the teeth and other items remained unidentified, ghosts of other lost souls. The community's reaction was swift and decisive. They could not bear to have the cabin standing as a monument to such evil. A few months after Weller's death, a group of townspeople went up to Forsyth Hollow in the middle of the night. They set fire to the cabin and watched as it burned to the ground. They wanted to erase the stain of Thomas Weller from their land, to purify the hollow with fire. All that remained was the stone chimney, standing like a tombstone over the dark history buried there. The eerie wind chimes were gone, and the terrible noises in the woods were never heard again. Today, more than a century later, the story of Thomas Weller is one of the darkest legends in the Ozarks. It is a cautionary tale told to remind people that evil can hide in the most remote and beautiful places. The site of the Weller cabin is now just a clearing in the woods, the stone chimney long since crumbled into dust. But the story lives on. It is a chilling reminder of the quiet man on the hill, the whispers in the woods, and the terrible secrets that a storm once washed into the light. It serves as a permanent shadow on the history of foresight, a dark secret the Ozarks will never forget.